Okay, friends. So, thank you everybody for joining us. As Benji said, we're recording, and if you guys have any issues, you can raise your hand and unmute yourself, but we're going to try to keep everybody on mute for the duration of this part. My name is Zach Berg, and I am the head cheesemonger of Monger's Provisions. We have a really, really exciting tasting today, full of many great people. Benji is the person who you heard before, and Benji is the monger behind the mongers. He is going to make sure that we don't have any technical difficulties, and then I don't miss any wonderful questions as I get too excited and start talking very quickly. It's one of the things that will happen tonight, I can guarantee it. And then we'll probably have Will. I didn't actually know if he's there already, but Will be around, and he'll certainly be on the chat and making sure if you have any questions that are very technical that he can answer those, and he'll also help add that way. And we're very excited to welcome an extra special guest, Rachel Juhl of Essex Cheese, with us tonight. Juhl and I have worked for 13 or 12 years together. It's been a long time for many shops and a couple coasts, and it's very exciting to have her on this Zoom tonight.
I'm so stoked.
Yay, 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 yay. So I want to make sure that I invite everybody to taste along throughout the night. We're going to make sure we talk about every individual cheese, but like I mentioned before, get excited and carried away. And so, feel free to kind of taste throughout the night, but just leave yourself enough that when we're talking about that cheese, you have some to reference. And we're going to make sure to talk about all the flavor notes, the stories, talk about pairings with the wines, and, just generally have a really fun time tonight. So make sure to ask questions. We want to see that chat moving and hear about all your favorite recipe ideas or the things you like doing with these cheeses. And yeah, that's the general introduction. Does anybody have questions in the very beginning before we kind of keep moving through it?
We're ready to dive in.
Sweet, sweet. Okay. So I'm going to jump into this wine. I think that's what I like to start this way. In case everybody's not going to open up 2 bottles of wine tonight, I want you to know what we're working with. And I do encourage you to open up both because we're going to talk through them both and taste them with the different cheeses. So starting off with the white wine, we have Lockhart Chardonnay. And as I mentioned earlier, Lockhart is coming out of California. And I think it's made in this really beautiful style where it's the best of both worlds. It's soft and has a little bit of that like malolactic fermentation, to use a long word that I enjoy, which gives it that rounded woody note. And then it also, primarily, it's all about the fruit with this wine, the fruit and the acid, steel tank fermented, so a little bit more French in that nature. And I think the best of both worlds. And then we have one of the classic wines from our shop and really the classic French imports into America, Kermit Lynch, who is a amazing wine importer and a shop in Berkeley, California. And Kermit's been selling wine from France since the 70s into America and authored a great book, My Tales from the Wine Route. And this is an example very similar to what Jules will talk about with Essex of like years of sourcing prowess and experience in making these relationships where he's able to get really some of the best Rhone producers, secondary fruits, and make this bottle that we can all afford to drink on a normal night, even though it's full of some really beautiful wines. And so those are the 2 wines. I always think the Rhone has darker red fruits. If you're thinking about, a flavor wheel, it's less about being cherries. It's more about like mulberries and blackberries with this wine. Yeah. Okay, friends. Any questions about the wines before we jump into the cheeses?
No questions, but Will does want people to know that, he warms his cheese up a bit so it's sweaty like Zach at a catering event. So ready to dive right in on that one.
On that note.
Okay. Wow. That sets the tone for tonight. I told you, it's a bunch of friends tonight. So It's going to be a fun group. Feel free to use the chat. Cool. So Comte all day. We're going to start with the first cheese, this beautiful wedge of cheese. Comte is a cheese that is near and dear to the shop and all of our hearts. I'm going to make sure not to talk too much about the cheese because Jules knows a lot more about this than I do. But this is a really cool cheese, and I've sold this exact Comte from Essex, aged in or made by Marcel Petit, aged in Fort St. Antoine, since Zingerman's to Bayreuth to now Monger's Provisions. And that's true of really all the cheeses brought the Crevero, and that's only because Crevero came into the Essex portfolio after I left Zingerman's. But all of these cheeses have been with me for my entire career, and Comte is really one of the flagships about this company. So I'm going to let Jules take it away because I've already talked too much at this point, and we'll hear what she has to say about this beautiful cheese.
You're fine. So at Essex, we import from 5 different countries and a total of only about 12 different cheeses. So quite small. If you think about it in terms of scale, the next smallest importer of cheese brings in 350. So many people would wonder, why bother with only 12? Why go to all that work? And so as the importer, we have the ability to legally bring things in. We handle logistics and things like that. But really, Comte is at the heart of what we do and is the first cheese we ever worked with since 2006, so 14 years. And what we do at Essex is kind of take a look at the U.S. market and see what cheeses are misrepresented or underrepresented. And so then why is the question? Is it because those cheeses are not really available anymore and they're only available kind of in really large factory format style cheeses, highly commoditized? Or are they only too small a production that it just doesn't even leave its little geographical area? And also, are they true classics? Are they something that's really worth kind of making sure is represented on a counter? And Comte checks every single one of those boxes in spades. So Comte is as you can see, it's a harder cheese. It's not quite as hard. We wouldn't call it a true hard cheese like a Parmigiano-Reggiano. Particularly because of the texture that we go for. So Comte is a raw milk, cow's milk cheese. It does come from France. It comes from a really small region, the Franche-Comté region. To give you scale, it's 2/3 the size of Rhode Island. And yet this is the #1 cheese consumed in all of France by a landslide. And it's massive wheels. They're 80 pounds, as Will has been talking about. It's expensive because it's 80 pounds. You're buying a lot when you buy a wheel. And yet it's this cheese that can have great variety in it, which is, I find the beauty in it. You can really have literally thousands of different cheeses in Comte. To say somehow that you've had a Comte and you've tasted Comte is really inaccurate because it can be anywhere legally from 4 months to 3 years old. Depending on where it's made within this small geographical region, the flavors will vary. Depending on time of year, depending on how it's cared for. Like all these different factors can really impact the cheese. And so that's part of why we love it, is because it has so much diversity in it. There's so much to celebrate. And so our founders, Daphne and Jason, were in love with this cheese. They both had grown up in France for a great deal of their childhood. If you live in France, you do eat this cheese every single day, if not 3 times a day, because you can have young breakfast Comte, you can have evening Comte, and Comte you cook with. And so for us, when we saw that in the U.S. market, Comte wasn't here. The only kind of Comte that was coming in was individual shops like Zingerman's or Formaggio Kitchen in Massachusetts that were doing their own importing, which is a lot of work. There's a lot of logistics. It's also very limiting because you don't just buy one wheel. You want to make your weight count, all those kinds of things. Or the only other Comte that was coming in was kind of through big, large restaurant distributors. And they were just kind of buying it for chefs who had trained in France. Most people thought it was the same as Gruyere. Legally through the 90s, it still could be called Gruyere de France. So there was really a lack of education with this cheese, which was a real sore point for our 2 founders and any French person. And especially also Swiss, because they're very protective of Gruyere. They don't want them to be confused as somehow the same. So we started bringing this in, and the question was, okay, if you're in France and every French woman and family and has 4 Comtes in their fridge, which I can attest to because I've lived in France, we don't even have 1 in the United States. We can't start there, right? We can't have the 4 different profiles. So what would be that Comte that if you were to bring it into your fridge, you would have with breakfast with Honeycrisp apples, you could have with a salad shaved or cooked into a fondue or a gratin or a grilled sandwich, or also stand up for at the end of the night with your cognac or red wine. So what Comte could possibly encapsulate kind of all these different things. And then that's where the Essex Comte came in. So we get our cheeses from the Fort Saint Antoine, which is this really amazing below ground subterranean army fort that's from post-Napoleonic era. It was only ever used for boot camp, and then World War I happened, technology changed, all this kind of stuff, and it was basically completely defunct. Plus the French are really good at giving up. And so they gave up the fort, and they're like, okay, but every fort in France is owned by the village that it's in. The government does not own it. And so then the city, the village, which is like 100 people of Saint Antoine, owns this fort. And it was not in use for about 40 to 50 years. And then until the 60s, where a cheesemaker, Marcel Petit, was kind of wandering around, and he found this below ground fort. And what was really amazing about it, if anyone's been in a cave before, it's really consistent temperature, really consistent humidity, quite cold, damp, which is prime for cheese affinage, which affinage meaning to age, to bring to finish. And so he was like, well, we're always aging cheeses above ground in really warm cellars. We're getting kind of sometimes off flavors, and we're always doing this, meaning a 700-year-old history. So like, it's just how Comte was done. And yet he wondered, what if we could actually do something more similar to what the south of France is doing and put these cheeses in caves? Colder environment, more consistent variable, less variables, more consistent environment, and get a more finesse control of the flavors. Better texture, less cracking, less kind of pooling sour flavors. And so since the 60s, Marcel Petit's company, it's a family-owned company, has aged now 120,000 wheels of Comte in this fort, which seems bananas, because that's a lot of cheese when you times it by 80 pounds. But actually, they're only about a mid to low grade size affinage facility for Comte, because that's just how big Comte is in France. There's really, really large producers. And what's even more amazing about it, why we fell in love with it and why we chose to work with Marcel Petit, is because they taste every single wheel. Not every single batch, which is what most people, 99% of cheese selection is done by batch, meaning one make, one day of production. They taste every single wheel. And to sum that up really quickly, why, the French, of course, you spend 3 years talking to them and they'll eventually kind of explain it to you. But to really kind of quickly sum it up for the sake of this conversation, you look at it like apple trees. So if you have one grafted branch to graft and make your own new apple tree, that's one date of production, right? Like a birthday. But it produces hundreds of apples that are not ready at the same time, right? So there's different reasons why they might be ready. Some are closer to the light, they're closer to the exterior, the sunlight, and they ripen faster. Some are clustered together and they self-ferment because of that. Other ones are farther and more distant, covered by the shade, and they take longer. Bugs, animals, all sorts of different things impacted biology. And those apples are ready at different times, which is why you hand pick apples when they're ready to get the best quality possible. And so for the team at Marcel Petit, which is 8 men who take care of 120,000 wheels, they firmly believe you need to taste every single wheel in order to make sure that it's ready at its correct time. And for us, who was trying to build this profile of a cheese that would be ready for all these different circumstances, flavor is the most important thing. Age does not matter. It's not a metric that is accurate for quality. Even location, things can vary month to month, depending on the cheesemaker, season, all that kind of things. And so for us, Marcel Petit, the fact that they cared so much about the trajectory of a cheese was really resonated a lot with us. So we've worked with them for the last 14 years, and we go and select every single order. So they taste every single wheel of cheese before it's sold to a customer, but we do an extra layer by being there during the process for every single order every 5 weeks. So we do that to calibrate the profile, but also to build a relationship with them. We did that. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to interrupt to brag about you for a second, because last year when you were in France doing the selection and I got to watch you talk through all these amazing variations of flavors of Comte, all in French, it was just shocking. I didn't actually know that Juhl was capable of this. And I also just wanted to say, correct me if I'm wrong, does Benoit refer to himself as a chef de cave, right? He's like the chef of the cave.
He isn't, because he's the salesperson, but the gentleman who worked in the caves, yes, chef de cave. Yep.
Yes,
so
I always love this terminology.
Yeah, so that's, we work with specifically 2 gentlemen in the cave of the 8. They manage like our selection process. And the youngest one there has been there for 18 years. So this is a true, some people ask when you witness this, the video you're referring to, you know, how do they know like where it's going to go and how can you detect flavors like this? Well, when you have, it's just literally tasting nonstop for 18, 20 years. So Jose, who we work with, has been in for 27, which is insane, but you have such a niche job. Like for 27 years, you just showed up at work and tasted Comte every single day. Like, it's crazy.
That guy's winning.
Yeah, right?
That is amazing.
What am I doing in my life? Like, yeah.
So can I, real quick, I want to just mention, you know, you mentioned Daphne briefly, and I remember very distinctly one of the first tastings I ever witnessed was a whole tasting on Comte with Daphne Zeppos. And I was working at Zingerman's, and it was a really eye-opening moment. I always think this cheese, and I hope at this point you've all eaten it, several bites of it, people sometimes will call it mild, and I think it's not mild, it's just so nuanced. There's so much flavor. It's just not like giant, salty, big flavors. And I always find it to just be a cheese worth an entire tasting. And I could talk about it for days. I think Comte is one of the most complex cheeses that we ever get to taste, and the difference between the different profiles. And we always bring in an extra special aged wheel, the Sagesse, also from you guys for Christmas. And it's just you know, Comte all day is it's worth chanting.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think that's also partially why, you know, we love it. Daphne loved it so much. It's been, even before I started working with Essex, I found Comte to be an incredibly special cheese and dynamic, actually, because it has so much variety to it. But like you said, it's the difference. So many people compare it to Gruyere just because they are cousins, is what I call. And a huge fundamental difference between the two is that Gruyere is brined versus Comte is not. It's just dry salted. So when you brine something, you get higher acid flavors, you get more intense, robust flavors, right? A fresh pickle tastes, or fresh cucumber tastes very different than one that's been brined, right? And so then you have that kind of, if you're used to a Gruyere, which is so much more popular than Comte because of just, the Swiss are really good at marketing, guys. We all know their watches. But the Gruyere, you know, it kind of punches you upside the face. Like, it just really does. And so if you're used to that and you're kind of using that as your benchmark, many people will then taste Comte and be like, oh, it's mild. And it's like, well, I guess, yeah, if you're comparing the two, but it's not boring by any means. And if it is, they didn't do a good job selecting. So
absolutely.
Yeah, that's a lot of it.
So when we talk about these cheeses and the wines, we're going to kind of pepper it in throughout the conversations, but I think that we'll use kind of two sets of approaches when we talk about pairing things. We talk about complementary flavors and contrasting flavors, and I think this Comte, you know, we keep talking about the complexity. It's like the perfect cheese to start this wine discussion with. So as you eat the Comte, if you were drinking the white wine with it, I think this is going to be much more of that contrasting experience where all that fattiness gets cut by the acid. And I think it really, it kind of brings out some of the browned butter and deeper dairy notes of this cheese. So that to me is a contrasting pairing. But when you try it with the red, I think it pulls out, you know, Juhl just mentioned the acid that this thing has because of the way it's brined. And I think it pulls out some of the fruitiness of the cheese and the saltiness in a really nice way. So depending on what you like in wine and cheese, you might like either one. They're both really tasty. I also, as a little segue, you'll see that I always kind of play with the paste of my cheese. I'm chewing one piece and then using the other like silly putty. And tonight's cheeses are also texturally different, but it's actually a really good night to do a little bit of that. And the reason is just to give you a quick brief thing about how I taste and a lot of this selection. And Juhl, please chime in if you have something to say about this, but your mouth can only get so much information. We all just taste the deliciousness. You almost get carried away by the fat and all the saltiness. And so my fingers can perceive a lot of the protein versus fat and how crumbly it is in ways that I find my mouth just can't pay enough attention to. So I always find it interesting to play with the paste of these cheeses as well as eating them.
Yeah, it's also a really great way to open up the aromas. Because 80% of taste is aroma. So, and aromas are released through heat. So because they're gas droplets. And so if you have them, they're all contracted when they're cold. And so then your hands being 98 degrees, hopefully you don't have COVID and it's like not 108 or something like that. But your normal hands will just warm up the cheese and they'll release those aromas also. So you're getting kind of two things done at the same time where you're able to determine texture and kind of prepare yourself for what you're going to put in your mouth. But then you're also making sure that once it is in your mouth, you'll get kind of the best experience out of it.
So friends, I'm going to get ready to move on to the Goudas because I fear that otherwise I'll talk about Comte all night. It's just too much of a beautiful cheese. Does anybody have any Comte questions before we move on to the twin Goudas in the middle of the tasting?
Looks like no questions so far. Looks like you're good to move on.
Beautiful. I just want to mention real quick, I saw Will said that he likes Comte gratins, and I like Will's Comte gratins. They're really delicious. It's a great recipe idea. Okay, the Goudas. I actually had the pleasure of meeting one of the women behind these beautiful Goudas this October when I was in Italy. And actually I got to see Juhl when I was out there as well. But I was at a cocktail party and I saw Betty Koster walk into the room and I like ran up to her and I was like, oh, you're Betty Koster. And she's like, yeah, who are you? People don't do this to me. I'm just a cheese woman. Like, but she's an amazing, amazing importer of Dutch cheeses. And the Broadbender, I've been saying, is like a goat milk creamsicle for years. It has this amazing flavors. I also think of it as a gateway goat. So often people in this country think chèvre and goat cheese, and I don't know why we like to say this one cheese in French and usually only talk about like one version of goat cheese, but goat cheese is just like any other milk. Goat milk can be made into many different textures, and I think this Gouda offers a really cool gateway into that world that is so different than a grocery store log of fresh cheese. It has so much more complexity, sweetness, and rounded flavors while still being so creamy. It's absolutely one of my favorite cheeses. I'm going to say that for all four cheeses, so I should just stop that right now. But Broadbender is a really cool cheese coming from the southern part of the Netherlands. And yeah, it's just a cheese that I've always really appreciated and loved. Jules, can you tell us a little bit about how you guys brought that into your collection?
Yeah, so with Comte, as I said, it was the first cheese, so we kind of looked at, okay, the US market doesn't have Comte, or if it does, it's not really easy to get your hands on, and if you can, it's not a great quality, right? So that was, and to us, that was a great travesty, because how dare you? So now we moved through kind of over the next couple of years, what would be the next cheese? A couple of those we're going to talk about later on. And we got to Brabander, or to a goat Gouda. We were already working in the Netherlands with this lovely woman, Betty Koster, that Zach mentioned. And we actually had a customer come to us and they asked, so a lot of the Goudas that we work with in the Netherlands, the reason why we work with them is because we're trying to preserve truly traditional and authentic practices and use of local ingredients. What's happening a lot in the Netherlands is that people buy milk from other countries, but make the cheese in the Netherlands because if anyone's been here, you can say that in the chat if you've been to the Netherlands. It's a really small country with very limited square mileage. And so for that reason, you don't have a lot of pasture land for that reason. So you can only have so many cows. There's actually a lot of rules and government regulations about that also. So you have a finite amount of milk available to you to make cheese, and yet Netherlands is one of the biggest demanded sources of cheese in the world. And so they end up buying milk from other locations, freezing it and get really poor quality, or they end up pumping their animals full of steroids and milking them 4 times a day, and you get really poor protein content, really non-existent flavors, all these kinds of things. And so for us, when we were kind of looking at the Netherlands, we didn't want to work with anything like that. We wanted to work with something much more authentic, much more traditional, like the Boerenkaas style cheeses, which if people have heard Boerenkaas, it means farm cheese. Boeren is Dutch for farm, kaas, Dutch for cheese. And so we were looking for something more like that in the sense of smaller production, more authentic ingredients. And so we had worked with about 2 different Goudas in the Netherlands, and a customer came to us asking about goat Goudas because they were getting more popular. People were branching out into goat's cheeses. And so they asked, though, well, are there goat's milk Goudas, using your relationships in the Netherlands with Betty and farms, are there ones that use more authentic ingredients as opposed to, here's a little bit of science, we talked about science a little bit earlier, starter cultures. So you have four ingredients in cheese: milk, rennet, which is what coagulates the milk and gets you curds and whey. You have salt, which is kills bacteria. It helps control bacteria in the cheese, also adds flavor. And then you also have starter cultures. And what they do is they add texture and flavor to your cheese and kind of help you guide your end product. So a lot of the Dutch cheeses, they use starter cultures made in huge labs to give you a sweeter and more crunchy cheese, because everyone wants really sweet and really crunchy Gouda. So we all want. So the world wants. And we've become accustomed to. So instead of making your own starter cultures or using something a little bit more natural, they've kind of contrived these starter cultures in labs. But our customer wondered, is there anyone who's actually doing it more authentically? And so we used Betty Koster. So Betty's a third-generation cheese professional in the Netherlands. Her grandmother was the first woman to own a cheese shop in Amsterdam. And so she's modeled her business after buying directly from farms, building really strong relationships with the producers, and helping as the market has changed and moved much more towards these kind of large commodity style, big factories, big corporations, kind of losing the heritage of the Dutch cheese making. She's there to kind of make sure they still have a place to sell their product and get a fair price. A lot of that times means she has to export it because the Dutch themselves can't consume it all and don't really want to. And so we went to her. We're like, is there a goat's milk producer? We've worked with you with cow. We've worked with you some other things. And she said, yes, in the south. So in the south of the Netherlands is a region called Brabant. It's right on the Belgian border. And it's the soil content is really high silt. So it's really fragile soil. So it's not good for cows because cows are big babies. And they like to tear up the land because they're heavy. And they also like to eat a lot. So that kind of soil is not good for pasturing. So the cows kind of all live up in the north of the Netherlands, and it's better for goats down there because they eat a lot less, they have a lot less demands, and they're also more gentle on the soil. So we went there. There's a cooperative. So there's not farmstead. It's not a Boerenkaas. It's not a small romantic little farm, but it is a cooperative of 20 actually 200 very small goat farmers who are using all their own goats. They're the Sanen breed, which gives you really clean flavors. A lot of the times when people don't like goat, it's two things. One, how the cheese was cared for. So you get really off intense flavors. And sometimes that's kind of why you don't like it. It's because it was aged for a little too long, or it's been temp was not right. But then also breed. So there's different breeds of goats that give kind of more gamey flavors. And the Sanen breed doesn't. It tends to be more clean, more mineral in flavor. So they use these goats. And that's why you kind of, when you eat this cheese, get a really nice, light, luscious, clean flavor. But in addition, it is sweet, obviously. I hope you've been eating it. It is fudgy. I call it like goat caramel fudge. But it doesn't have this like Maillard reaction, really intense brown sugar bananas foster aftertaste, which is what you get in a lot of commodity Goudas. And those are from the starter cultures that are made in like a large lab. It's a forced kind of non-authentic sweetness. And so this producer, they actually make their own starter cultures. So they're doing it in a truly authentic old school way, historically, before scientists knew how to manipulate biology and all those kind of things. You just made your own. You had milk, you had whey as a byproduct of cheese. You kept it overnight. You added some more milk to it and created a little fun little place, a happy area for all these different microbes to grow. And then you would add that to the next day's production of cheese, and you would have your own starter cultures. And so this producer is doing just that. And so you get a much more authentic representation of terroir, actually. This cheese tastes not because of something added, but because of really high quality alfalfa that's being grown there, the silt that yields really great soil and really therefore great pasture for these goats. But then in addition, you have this really high quality milk now that's being used to make its own starter cultures. So it's really fun. And this was a very different way for us to research a cheese because we didn't come up with it. Someone actually came to us and asked us to find it. But it was really kind of incredible. The last six years, I think, or maybe more, 7 years we've been working with it. Feels like it was just yesterday, but It's been a real labor of love to try to earn these people's trust, because there's the Netherlands, they're also used to someone kind of coming at them and just wanting to buy all their cheese and export it around the world, and no stories being told or anything like that. And so for us, it's actually taken quite a while. They were very happy to sell to us because they're used to selling, but to have kind of a relationship with them and learn about their cheeses has taken longer. But we've invested the time over the last 7-8 years to do that, because I could sit here and just be like, it tastes good, but that's a really boring class. Super boring.
I love that. I love that. If you guys are as obsessed with this cheese as I am, you should check out Black Betty, which is a cheese that we only gets released once a year around the holidays, which is Betty holds on to them for a full year, right, Juhl?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this cheese is around 10 months old. So then when you get to Black Betty, the older version of it, it is around 15 months. So it's like an additional like 9 months after. Yeah, 15 to 18 months.
And Rachel, we do have a question for you. How did you become so involved with cheese? Nancy wants to know.
I have a bit of a unique story for cheese. I was just saying this recently. Cheese people are amazing because they literally can come from any part of the universe, I swear. Like any background whatsoever. And that's actually more common to have a really like non-food related background. I actually grew up in a cheese shop. Like that doesn't happen. I grew up
a unicorn.
I grew up all over the United States because my dad's a government employee, so we moved around a lot. And at one point, my mom left research. She was a medical researcher, a nurse, heading up different programs. And yeah, she decided to buy a cheese shop that had a charcuterie department and a cafe and a restaurant. And I was 10, so I was slave labor. Yeah. So I was forced into cheese. No, I kind of was. But then I could have left. I tried. I find you can't really quit cheese. Like
it brings you right back.
It does, man. If you're meant for it, I think. Like there's people who can leave it, and then I'm like, okay, you're not meant for this then. Like if you can actually walk away from cheese, you're not meant for it. I tried. I changed my degree like 4 times. And then I started working at Essex though 8 years ago. So, but my background is nutrition and culinary arts, technically. But I was just a little wee monger at a very young age, being paid in chocolate cake.
We're really looking forward to when Will's twins grow up to be free labor. That sounds like a great thing for our labor budget.
Yeah, give them a bleach bucket, you'll be fine.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, friends. Real quick, I want to touch on the wines. And Benji, were you able to type up the notes?
I did not actually. So if you can go through them.
All right. So I'm going to run through this real quick because there's so much to talk about, but I want to make sure that you guys get a little bit of language on how to grade these pairings, because we're going to taste a bunch of things and there's all this different dynamic and interaction. 1 through 10, how we rate things normally, it just doesn't lend enough language. So Daphne was the one who came up with this, and she taught it to me when I was just a wee monger myself. And Daphne's actually the first person to ever call me a cheesemonger. She addressed a thank you note because I helped her with this tasting to Zach Berg, the cheesemonger, and set me on my path. But she explained that when you're tasting these things in this interplay, there's a -2 to +3 range. So -2, toothbrush or toothpaste and orange juice, really bad. Everything clashes. A -1, one thing clashes. Think cocktail party, you're grazing, drink wine, eat something, all of a sudden the wine tastes super metallic. -1. A 0 is most things. We just eat, we're not conscious, we're not paying enough attention, or they're just not interacting. 0 interaction, 0. A +1, I'm cooking red sauce. I pour a little red wine into my red sauce. It makes it perfect. I didn't really do any favors for the wine though. +1. +2 is everything starts to balance, right? Depending on what you thought of this goat cheese, this with the white wine to me starts to get into that +2 realm. All of a sudden I get like green from the wine, a little bit more of the like fruit itself. I get a little bit more of this minerality. Jules mentioned the silt in the soil of the cheese, and this wine pulls out that minerality in a really fun way. But it also makes the cheese more delicious. The cheese is sweet, and I think that extra acid just makes you wanting to come back more. So they complement each other in this positive 2. A positive 3, God willing, we have one of these tonight. And if you think we taste a positive 3, make sure to tell everybody. A positive 3 is going to be peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? The sum are better than the parts. We have made a new combination of flavors, and this is how you should always eat them together. I think that there's so few famous pairings and positive 3s because it's actually pretty hard. Not everything is as easy, and not everything goes as well as like a perfect Stilton and a pork. And that's why these things kind of take on a level of allure, these famous tastings. But I really think that the goat cheese, the Brabender, and the white were delicious.
Will had a similar comment, said, how about that Chardonnay with the Brabender? So you guys are on the same level, of course. Sarah says
happens.
Carmen and Fig are a +3 in her mind, should be sold together. So it's a big +3 for people. And then Anastasia wants to know if you can take a huge bite out of the biggest size cheese in front of you. So, maybe save it for the end, but it's a big one.
I'll do one of these. These I unwrapped for the display effect.
Sorry. I'll mute us now. Bye-bye now.
I love you guys. Okay. That was awesome.
Well, and then we do have one question from Evan. So, Evan, if you want to unmute yourself super quickly, if you raised your hand up.
Hey, everyone. Hey, Zach. This is actually Seth Samuels. I'm here with my brother, Evan. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Ben, to Rachel, for doing this. I just drove home. I haven't done a virtual event like this, and I so admire your passion for this. It's really been awesome. So just thank you.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Thank you very much.
Definitely.
Friends, are we ready to go on to the next Gouda?
Looks like it's time.
I think. Okay. So, this is their signature Gouda. This is Betty's signature Gouda, L'Amuse signature, and it's a 2-year-old profile. I like to joke that these are like Beamster XOs that Betty has rescued. It's coming from that region. And, the story of Betty, similar to Essex in the selection and how can you take something that's so beautiful and keep elevating it to the highest level, not to take away from Juhl's presentation because she knows so much more about these things than I do. But Betty, her whole thing was raising the temperature in these caves, not to take anything away from the Dutch, but they really started this global commoditization of cheese. They were one of the first countries to really effectively sell cheese around the world. And because of that, it was always about aging it cold and keeping every dollar you could and not losing anything in your moisture loss. And I believe when Betty was in Italy, she realized the caves were just a little warmer there. And she had this moment of what happens if I turn up the temperature. And so she gets so much more flavor development from her cheese. This L'Amuse has been our #1 seller at every iteration of our business. We've done online sales, we've done Ferndale, we've done the butcher shop in Ferndale, Midtown, pop-ups, and it just always rises to the top. There's something about the intensity of flavor. It's also, I find, very versatile, even though it's so bold. It goes with a lot of things, whether or not you're talking about eating it with like an apple or caramel or pairing it with wine or scotch. It's a cheese that has so much humph that it really can like hold its own against most things. So we just find ourselves coming back to it. And, Juhl mentioned earlier that we all like our crunchy Goudas, and this is chock full of beautiful tyrosine deposits and flavor crystals and whatnot. So it just becomes a really popular cheese with our friends.
It does, and it's one of those critical cheeses. So Betty, when she was looking for representing the wide world of Gouda in the Netherlands, because it's, historically with Gouda, especially because of their exports, they, people kind of only know Gouda as one of 2 things. They're like, okay, it's 5 years old, super aged, and really crystalline, and bam, full of flavor. Or it's red wax Edam, which is not Gouda. Edam. They really have confused and lost kind of the diversity in the cheese. And yet, so Betty's worked really hard to help celebrate the fact that Gouda is a really diverse cheese. All these different areas would make different versions of this cheese. But nonetheless, you still need kind of that, like, if she calls it, if you were to enter your cheese into the Olympics and send your best, And so what she was looking for was this cow's milk Gouda. There's a lot more cows in the Netherlands, so that represents their agriculture better. It would come from the northern region where the town of Gouda actually is, and where you have these really large, beautiful millstone-shaped cheeses. It's close to the port, so that's the cheeses that were also used for export all the time. They were great protein sources for all the sailors. That's really how it all started. But the question was, like you said, they kind of killed the cheese a bit in the affinage. We already talked about the problem of pushing your animals to produce more milk than they produce. So you have lower protein, you have lower flavor, lower fat. Fat is flavor. Remember Julia Child. And so then you need to add all these additives to actually make it taste good. So, really not good. So Betty's like, I don't want to work with those people. So then she goes to the Beemster Polder, which is a state. It's a region. If you know the brand Beemster, it's because they took the name from where they're from. And this is known as the best milk in the EU. It's actually where Ben & Jerry's gets all of their milk for their EU production of ice cream. It's incredibly high quality, really high, beautiful, luscious flavor. That's because of the blue clay soil there. And so it's great for cows. They can give really high protein, all the kind of things naturally because of their diet. But this producer, so they're making great cheeses. They're doing a good job. They're not adding too much salt. They're not playing around with really forced starter cultures, like I said earlier. But then they have this history of just throwing things in basically a really large walk-in cooler at 37 degrees, coating it in a paraffin wax. If anyone gets pedicures, you can get a paraffin wax treatment. It really locks in moisture. Nothing can breathe. And that's so that you don't lose weight. You don't lose money then. It is great for transit. But also, you've basically just parked a cheese somewhere and nothing's going to happen for 5 years. You'll get harder cheese. It will get more intense in flavor, but not actually because any microbial activity is happening. Because as we all know, you put your food in the back of the fridge, your leftovers, and it starts tasting pretty good. You just kind of killed any chance of it. And so for Betty, her question was, you have literally the best milk in the EU. The entire continent wants your milk. And yet we have to pasteurize it because we are using cooperative. We want to make sure we're safe and those kinds of things. So we pasteurize it. So we kind of already killed off some of the natural microbial flavors that could be in there. And now you parked it in a walk-in fridge. And now you've just given it no chance of celebrating what is in the terroir of this polder. So for her, like Zach said, she knew because of her own importing that Italy was using these more natural caves. France uses more natural caves where you have this go up by 20 degrees, go into the high 50s, and you just get way more flavor and better texture. So instead of a forced texture that's being kind of frozen, and that's why it gets hard, and that distorts the proteins, and that you get a natural texture. Those crystals, that hardness is coming because of the tyrosine that is naturally drying out with a semi-permeable coating as opposed to a really thick wax paraffin coating. So any flavor you get, though, is actually natural as opposed to kind of forced and controlled. And you actually get more flavor. So yes, we get the sweet, we get the butterscotch, we get all the crunchy flavors we all love, but you also get umami. I find this cheese actually has incredible beefy notes. My favorite way to eat it, I mean, again, kind of talk about pairings that are like the peanut butter and jellies of the world. Take a black lava salted cashew nut and this cheese and a dark stout beer, and it's like, why would you ever need to eat anything else? It's easy, but actually my favorite way to eat this is things that are more umami and briny. So I really like it with like a stone ground mustard, gherkins, and a speck. Like something way more kind of complex, smoky, beefy, kind of vinegary acid. And the cheese goes in a completely different direction when you do that. And that's because there's actually flavor to the cheese. If you take a really just sweet, crunchy Gouda and do that, it won't have the same reaction because those beefy notes aren't there. It also is too dry. You kind of have this parched texture in your mouth. And so this one is aged only to 26 months. So it's not that 5-year-old Gouda. I actually encourage people all the time, and I think Zach and I have said this before. I'm sure I have. You know, people say, oh, well, people get mad because it's only 24 months. And I'm like, let's stop talking about age. Like, that's why Betty only calls it L'Amuse signature. It's her signature profile. It doesn't matter how old it is. It's just in a kind of encapsulated, perfect moment of like, this cheese right now, eat it. And stop fixating on like somehow it's 4 years old, that means it's better, or it's 18 months and all this kind of, we talk about age all the time about just not being marketing, like for the most part. And I feel like with this cheese especially, if you were to actually never know, if I didn't tell you it was 24 months, based on your past experiences, you'd think it was much older. Yeah, I love it.
Cool.
Certainly.
We do have a question about the tyrosine crystals from Will. Just if you could explain that. I don't know if you or Rachel want to.
I'll take a crack at it. And so tyrosine is a naturally occurring amino acid found in the milk that crystallizes with age. And people tend to really enjoy that texture and the flavors. And it also becomes this like, I guess, marking. So, Juhl mentioned when you're tasting the Comte as it develops, when you're tasting any cheese as it develops, this like interplay between age, fat, and tyrosine development is a really cool indicator and a really important indicator for how the cheese is going to develop. If it has tons of tyrosine crystals and it's only 6 months old and high fat, that cheese is maybe going to go off the rails. But if it's aging really beautifully and it has, a low tyrosine count, but a lot of flavor, it's probably going to age a little more gracefully. How did I do, Juhl? Was that
that's literally, I'm not even joking, that's the best explanation because that I've ever heard. Because so much of the time, the reason why I loved it is because so much of the time, we say we love the big crunchy crystals, but actually if you have too many of them, it's a fault in the cheese. So, and that's why for me, as someone who has been studying Gouda for 8 years now and been in cheese for a really long time, I personally never really liked Goudas when I was younger, which you'd think was weird because kids like sweet things, but it has a very unnatural texture. Something's off. Like it's not right. And so, and it's because you either used the wrong breed of cow. So like, that's why with really high fat, Jersey cow's milk cheeses, please don't age those super, super long. It's going to go sideways real fast. It's going to go not great. It's going to feel like really plasticky in texture and not be right. So, yeah, I agree with you in that sense of like that tyrosine is this great indicator of like where it's going, what we should be doing. And kind of back just to Comte, for instance, when we taste it, we actually, 80% of our selection process is texture because that helps you understand like where the flavor will actually go.
So cool. So cool.
I call them cheese fossils, memories of one's life. It's like little snippets in history.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I wanted to make sure we talked about the wine and how they interacted with the Goudas. I know we talked about the Chardonnay and the goat, but you mentioned the umami, and I think it's so important when you taste it with the red wine. Both Goudas actually go with the red wine. Goat and red often fight, but I found this one was really nice because of how round and soft Brabender is. And when you go with the L'Amuse signature in the red, I think it's also delicious. So my tasting notes for the white were the softer notes of the wine are kind of expressed, and I get all the dairy quality of the cheese. So it's much more of this malolactic kind of experience. And then when I go to the red, I get all that savory and all that umami that Juhl mentioned, and I get like almost like an anise, a little bit of the spiciness of the wine comes out. It's really, they're both really quite lovely. Benji, do we have any questions before we jump into Parm?
No questions. I think people are ready to get some of that Parm crystallization in their mouth as well.
I mean, what a great segue with all these crystallization to go to the real deal Holyfield Parmigiano-Reggiano. This is a cheese that, like, I think so many of us grew up loving this cheese. And often what we do at Mongers, we obviously are introducing you to the people and these cultures and faraway things. And it's really fun to be esoteric and introduce you to sheep's milk from the Pyrenees or, an American cheese that you didn't know even existed. But I sometimes think I enjoy showing you what you think you know and just exploding your mind a little bit on it. So, Parm is the king of cheese. It's a cheese that's existed for over 800 years. It's so storied and so delicious. And I think that, I'm going to actually steal something from the Essex campaign. I think for so long, we kind of thought of it as one cheese in America. And this is a great example of like debunking that idea. This is an expression of like where it's coming from and where it's been and all of these amazing things. When I was in Italy in October, I had the opportunity to actually be in this cave with Juhl and with Giorgio. It was one of the great privileges. I definitely walked away from that experience crying. I'm not going to lie. It was just too amazing. I've been selling this cheese for a really long time. I have been talking about this company for so long, and I've been really lucky to have a lot of one-on-one cheese experiences with Juhl, with Benoit, with all these people, but they always happened at Singerman's or at Cheesemonger Invitational or at all these places in the States. And to actually be in the cave, in the room where it happened, so to speak, was really special. This cheese, I think, is just, it takes Parm away from just being grated on your pasta, right? It's a cheese that all of a sudden it gives you privilege or the opportunity to chew and eat it as a table cheese and see the depth of this cheese and the story and the history. So I invite you to eat the Parmesan and see if I'm not going totally crazy, but I think it's a really special cheese and you're going to enjoy it a lot.
Yeah, I agree. It's at Essex, like I said, we're looking to kind of debunk. I like kind of what you said, and it is what we say is that we're kind of looking to debunk what you think you know about a cheese. So with Comte, it was this cheese that no one knew. And so we kind of had to re-educate or just educate in general. But then a lot of our cheeses that we work with, you think you know it, right? You think you know Gouda, and it's just sliced and in your grocery store, or it's really hard and aged. We work with 3 other countries and the same thing. It's like, oh, I think I know feta. I think I know these things, whatever. And same thing, Parmigiano-Reggiano. You think it's just Parmigiano-Reggiano. I think that some people literally think it only comes from one factory, where it's somehow like all just pops out of a factory and all these molds and it's all robots like making it. And there's 330 producers of Parmigiano-Reggiano. Granted, 90% of those are massive factories. They are kind of homogenizing the experience. That's because it's a $2 billion industry. And so it's a lot of money making at this point. But it's also incredibly labor intensive. So you have these small farms that Italy's had a really crappy economy for a long time. And so you have these small farms that are really struggling. And so they do start to pool. It started out as kind of this way of like, let's build a consortium, let's kind of unite our efforts together, let's help to lighten the load of the cheesemaker. And yet what you did is you took away their artisanality, you took away their heritage, you took away their name, right? Because it was just, now you're all the same cheese. There's no differentiating you. No one cares. And yet there's a stamp on every single cheese that says it comes from a different location. There is a different cheesemaker in each place. The Emilia-Romagna region, the 4 different regions within the Parm PDO are very diverse. You have Bologna, you have Modena, you have of all these different areas. It's very, very different. And you just marginalize them all, but thinking somehow we're helping them out. And so the family that we work with is Giorgio Crivero. His family's been aging cheese like super recently, like just since 1855. It's like super recent. They're kind of sort of like new at this thing. I like to tease that because they're literally one of the oldest like cheese families in the world. And it's he's 5th generation, and all they've ever done is Parmigiano-Reggiano affinage. They've never been cheesemakers, and that's because of where they're located. They're located in Bra, which is centered in between Torino and Milan and Modena, and kind of this triangle. So they were a really great distribution city historically. So they were a great location for kind of all the goods of these areas to come together and then get off to different places. So their family actually started as a distributor. They had caves, and they could hold cheeses like Gorgonzola and Taleggio and Parmigiano-Reggiano and get it to different places. And when they did that, they did it because they knew people specifically. So they worked with specific producers, they would build relationships with them, help them find the right customers, and kind of really build this one-on-one relationship. They didn't just buy anything. They were kind of a distributor. And then eventually, as the market in the Italian cheese world changed, these small producers were getting bought up and kind of taken over into big conglomerates. And the little guys were really struggling to like hold their own, because while it might seem nice to have someone lighten your load, that also means someone has an opinion of how you're doing things. And so Parmigiano-Reggiano in production, you're actually now part of a company where there's a president who's not the cheesemaker, and he tells you how you're going to do everything. And so Giorgio now works only with 2 producers. And he works specifically with them, really small scale. The one we buy is called San Pietro. They're located in Modena in the high mountains, which is just the Apennines. So it's not the Alps. It's around 2,100 feet. But what's amazing about this is the landscape and the terroir. So the majority of Parmigiano-Reggiano production is just in lowland. Because imagine you have cows that need to eat lots and lots of grass. So big pastures, flat land is a whole lot easier to grow grain. In the mountains, it's very, very difficult. Also, Italy's not really big on technology and transportation. So these winding, tiny roads and things like that, it's really hard to do that. So majority of Parmigiano-Reggiano production is just grass being fed on grass. That's pretty uniform in diversity. Probably about 30 different varieties in the hay contribution. When you get to the mountains of Modena, which is where balsamic comes from, really great stuff, you have now over 300 different kinds of what they call spontanea arabica. So just spontaneous wild flowers and grasses that grow. So there's no seeding that's done. And that's what this producer feeds 100% to their animals. So the majority of Parmigiano-Reggiano production, because of cost, around 50% of their feed doesn't even come from Italy. It comes from like Romania. And that's just because, again, cost. And if no one really cares about the cheese, then it doesn't matter, right? It's kind of this like really bad cycle that has happened. And so versus someone like Giorgio, who does care about the quality of the cheese, that does care about Massimo, the cheesemaker, and his 22 years of experience making 7 wheels a day. He does then care what your milk tastes like. So then he's really willing to pay you more to harvest your own crops, to grow and maintain your pastures, which is a lot more work, obviously. And so, and then someone like us, who then really is passionate and wants to know why does cheese taste so different? Which is then really what's funny. Zach and I were talking about this yesterday, and we've been working with this cheese since 2008. And if you can't tell already, I kind of like to know things and then share it with people. And for years, it was really hard to do that with them because we knew Giorgio and his family's legacy, but we really didn't know what about San Pietro. And that was because the Italians are very protective. The mafia joke is real in the sense that they're very fearful about like letting you in because like you might steal their business away or you might take information and use it against them somehow or things like that. And despite us having a really strong relationship with Giorgio and him witnessing all the things we did, he was very protective of Massimo. So we've been selling this cheese now for 2008, I can't do that, 12 years. It wasn't until 2015 that we visited. So 7 years of selling this cheese, and I never been to the farm, which is just unheard of with what we do. And it wasn't from a lack of trying, trust me. There's some pretty aggressive emails and phone conversations. And mostly not because I feel like I'm entitled to visit them. How can I possibly understand what's spontanea? I didn't know anything about the spontanea arabica. I didn't know he was only making 7 wheels a day in his own house and all these different things. I didn't know Massimo had been working there for 22 years. All that information then explains why this producer is different than the stuff you get graded at the grocery store, right? And so it was really special that we finally got to go. And now we get to go once a year, which is really amazing. But it's also kind of just wrap things up about the idea of Essex. It's why we stay small. So again, back to this kind of full circle question of why only 12 cheeses. Well, I hope you've been able to witness in the last 45 minutes that we fight really hard to have really intimate, close relationships with our producers. And that takes a lot of time. And so if we had 30, 40, 50 different products, there's no way you can develop those strong relationships, maintain them. And then at the end of the day, the goal is to have great tasting cheese all the time. That's the real goal. But then also really enjoy the people you work with. So to kind of wrap that up, the 2 things we look for when we're trying to find a new cheese is has to taste good, which feels silly because it's like, duh. But actually maybe money and cost is more important. And we have to like the people. So for us, it's all about flavor. It's all about making sure that flavor is there all the time. That's something we can really stand behind. And then do we like the people? And that takes a lot of time to make sure it happens. So I like my job.
Jules, quick question for you. So knowing you guys are so hands-on, and how has the pandemic impacted how you guys have been doing business so far?
Yeah, so When it comes to the cheese production side itself, it hasn't stopped. Those cows still gotta give milk, man. Those goats still gotta give milk. You gotta turn into cheese. Fortunately, we work with large and hard cheese, so we don't have as much of an impact when it comes to whether or not these cheeses that are being made today are not going to be, around because they're too fragile, like soft cheeses. We do have a concern though, because we have cheeses that have been aging and they're taking up space in the cave. And if we get it back up, we work with really small caves. So we've seen a big dip in business because we sell to a lot of restaurants. So that's definitely hit us hard. But we've become so the cheese is still being made, and I still have to protect my cheesemakers. So things in the European side that has changed, the one thing that has changed is our selection. So we're not able to go to the fort every 5 weeks to select our Comte order for the first time in 14 years, 16 years, 18, however many years. I don't know. We've been around a little while. But that's crazy. We've never, ever missed an order. And so that's been hard. But the amazing part is the relationships we have. They can do it for us, and they know exactly what we're looking for. Same thing with Manchego, another producer we work with, Betty, doing selection for our Black Betty, who's coming this fall. She was able to do selection for us. I normally would take customers to Europe and help educate them by letting them visit the farms themselves. I unfortunately don't get to do that, which is really, really heartbreaking. I normally would spend 2 to 3 months a year in Europe. I don't get to go at all this year, which really sucks. And then stateside, I normally travel 2 weeks a month. So it's been very different for me. I've never been home this literally in my entire adult life. So it's like literally a whole new universe for me. I've always been an on-the-go traveling person for the last 15 years. So it's quite bizarre, but we're doing lots of virtual classes. So our goal at my job at Essex is education and marketing. So how do you do that just sitting at home? Well, you could send some marketing materials, or you could, I don't know, be on the gram all the time, I guess. But that's not what I want to do, and it's not what we do. So Daphne was always about education at Essex, and that's how you build relationships with people, make them feel empowered to sell your product, make them feel excited to sell your product, and make them just enjoy their job. And so what I've been working on for the last 3 months now is just maintaining relationships with people. So make them still feel excited about their job despite really difficult times, help them feel connected still, because we all feel so isolated, and also kind of help still educate. I said early on that the desire to eat good food did not go away with this pandemic. The means to do it safely went away. So how can we just get past that? So I really love working with people like you guys, because you've been really scrappy since day one. Zach and I spoke within like a week after all this, and you guys were pivoting real quickly, which is awesome. And that's kind of what I'm trying to capture is, yes, we've had to make some changes in our company, but I never, ever want us to become not known for our education. So you've been teaching a lot of classes, and so have I. So, which keeps me busy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I feel very privileged to share a Zoom stage with you and be part of this education, because so much of my cheese education started in Essex Cheese teaching us. And I think that, Jules, you did such a great job of explaining this connection, and it's what allows us to tell these stories and connect you across the counter, because, I don't get to go to Europe for 2 to 3 months a year ever. And so, but luckily we have these connections, and we've had these years of working together. And so we're all able to kind of march together through that and, have these wonderful feedback loops. If I taste something off in the cheese, I know I can call Juhl and tell her, and she can get it to the next person. And it eventually ends up in the make room, which is just super powerful if you think about how big the world of food distribution is and how anonymous it can become. And so, we're so thankful to have these kind of partners to work with and allow us to give, hopefully you guys, the customers, really exceptional cheeses. In terms of the pairings, I hope you guys tried it with the white wine. It was explosive. I thought it was this like tropical white grapefruit, just boom. Oro Blanco, shout out, Will. That's Kevin Efros right there. And with a red with the Parm, I thought was just like, It reminded me a lot of tomato. It tasted so delicious. It made me want to make a pasta or do something else. They just clearly were symbiotic. These cheeses were all really wine friendly, and these cheeses in general I find to be, they have a soft spot in my heart, but they're the kind of cheeses you can just go back to over and over. They're great, always in your fridge cheeses. And we're just very thankful that we get to carry them. I think Essex is one of these companies in the world of cheese that becomes a benchmark, right? Will and I talk about this a lot. There's a handful of producers or importers that people will walk into our shop and be like, what kind of Neal's Yard dairy cheese do you have? What do you have from Essex? What do you have from Jasper? And it's a test, right? It's the cool kid cheese, I like to joke. And we're very lucky to be on that list of cool kids who get to carry these cheeses. So thank you. Should we jump into chocolate? I saw Dagny suggested that we try the chocolate and the parm. So I want to introduce the chocolate and then we can jump into the parm. And I think that I'm really happy we have Original Beans chocolate today. Original Beans is a really cool company out of Switzerland, and they do some of a similar kind of approach to what they do than I think Essex or Mongers does. They're Swiss are known for their chocolate production, but if you think about the world of chocolate that I think many of us grew up loving, Belgian, Swiss, German chocolate, there's no cacao pods in those countries. These are areas, these are people known for their manufacturing of them. But back to this idea of a taste of place, the terroir, there is no such thing as Swiss terroir when it comes to chocolate. There's a Swiss manufacturing style. And so Original Beans is taking the technology and the prowess that comes from being one of the world's dominant chocolate manufacturers, but they're applying it to heirloom beans and celebrating where the chocolate comes from. So I believe people either have the Beni bar from Bolivia or you have the Payura from Peru, and they're heirloom beans. They're done in this amazing Swiss style, so they're still really smooth. I think that that's really what comes away for me the most. And this company also is having a really cool mission where they're planting trees for every bar sold. I encourage you to check out their website and follow them in social. They do a really cool job of talking about these different origins. I always enjoy their social media. So a real quick discussion on chocolate, because I don't want to go too long, but you can hear that snap, hopefully you picked that up on my Bluetooth earpiece. And that shine, and that's how you know a chocolate is well tempered. At Monger's Provisions, we focus on these craft chocolates and this bean to bar movement, this idea of, we spent the whole hour talking about the story of every element. Why is chocolate any different? Why do we get to just say Hershey's is from, I don't know, somewhere in the tropics? We don't like that idea. We want to tell you the story of where your chocolate is from, and so you can experience it with a little more context. And really, we want to celebrate those important people who are working so hard to make the chocolate. Chocolate to this day is not mechanically harvested. There is no ability to do that. So somebody is climbing a tree with a machete and cutting a pod out, splitting that on the floor, fermenting it, drying it, roasting it, and then shipping it across the world. The idea that a chocolate bar is ever $1 is just crazy to me. You got to really ask yourself how $1 could be split that many ways. So we're really happy to sell chocolate that is a little more ethically sourced. It's not even a little more, it's much more ethically sourced. It's direct trade chocolate. And often the prices per ton of chocolate can be 4 or 6 times what commodity prices are. So farmers can actually live a livable wage in these places. Plus, it's delicious. What questions do you all have?
We had a question. So the cheese and the chocolate were mentioned together. The parm. Someone asked, do we eat them together or parm first then chocolate? Is there a right way to do a tasting like that?
So it's a great question, and the first answer to that is eat them separately. Whenever I'm doing a pairing, I want to get to know both parties separately so I can assess what's going on once you mash them together. And then the other really important thing, we did a cheese and chocolate tasting. I don't know. At this point, time is just an illusion, but it was a while back, and it's all about the ratio. So I'm going to get up and close. I have like this kind of a ratio, right? They're about the same size. The chocolate's a little thicker, so the parm's a little bigger, and I'm going to put them in my mouth together and chew. That's how I try a tasting, right? If you're eating pretzels and drinking beer, that's not a pairing. You got to mash them all up together. So check it out. Pardon me. It will matter which bar you got, but I think that is awesome. Good call, Dagny. I have the, I'm going to pronounce it really poorly, so if Will wants to jump in and correct me, but Payura, the Peru bar, and I always find that bar to be way brighter. So with the Parmesan, which is also like a high acid cheese, that tropical fruit kind of flavors, it really, they sing together in a really cool way. It gives the cheese a little more depth and like that bottom note that it doesn't usually carry, brings out that earthiness. That's wonderful.
Have a question for you. Let's see. Very glad for these tastings. They have great stories behind them and I learned so much. Once one knows no green cans are individually wrapped, how do you know where do you go? These tastings help one go in a better direction. I gave up cans and wraps a long time ago. Thanks. So just a nice, beautiful comment.
I love that.
Yeah. Also, so I know you're talking about kind of the chocolate with the cheese. Just talk about chocolate pairings in general, because I know that often comes up in our and how they interact with some of the other things like the wine and the other cheeses.
Totally. So, I haven't used this term very much at this tasting, but I often think about the volume of flavor, right? Things that are louder or quieter. In chocolate, no matter if it's a very mild chocolate or a very dark chocolate, is a really loud flavor profile. And so it can't just pair with anything. It will bowl over most things. And then it also is so rich and flavorful, and it has a lot of different compounds, like on a very scientific level. It's not just, it's not a simple product. There's a lot going on. And that means that there's a lot of points of interaction. And so I find that when you do things like chocolate and wine, there's a lot of opportunities for friction because of that points of interaction. If you drive down 29 in Napa, you would be led to believe that cab and chocolate is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And Will and I would be very quick to tell you that that's just marketing. Chocolate pairs really well with sweeter wines. That the bitterness of the chocolate, because there's a little bit of sugar in there, when you go to drink wine, your palate's looking for more sugar, and all of a sudden, instead, it gets tannic structure and acid, and it just brings out all the bitter qualities of the chocolate. And so I find chocolate pairs really well with Madeira, port, sherry, and some other things, but in general, I find it to be very challenging with wines. In terms of cheeses, it can be a lot of fun. It's not what most people think of, but we started this whole business by popping up and doing cheese pop-ups in a chocolate shop. So since day one, we've always played with them. My favorite is probably blue cheese and Vietnamese dark chocolate. I think that it's Maru, Ben Tray, and Bailey Hazen Blue is this like explosive, cool flavor. That and milk chocolate and triple creams is just like the uber dairy experience and very fun. So yeah, we encourage you to always try new things at Mongers, make new combinations, have a fun time journeying through food, and please ask questions. And I saw, or Benji mentioned somebody in the comments talking about their own journey through from the green can to parm like this, and I think that if I could give any piece of advice, it's find passionate retailers, right? Sometimes they're at your grocery store, sometimes they're at an independent cheese shop, but if you see somebody standing behind the counter who, like me, just wants to talk and taste and get involved with cheese, you found the right place to buy cheese, and you're going to have a much richer experience than by yourself in the grocery store picking up these, cryovac inert pieces of cheese. So,
couple more questions. Yeah. How do you pick the wines when you use them for pairings, and then where can we get the Chardonnay as well?
So the Chardonnay is available online at mongersprovisions.com, as all of these things are. How do I pick the wines? For me, it's a lot about, I know the cheeses fairly well, and I know what kind of flavors, and so I want to have wines that are going to let me make a couple different points. So I knew that this, with that rounded note, was going to give me a lot of interaction with like lactic sugars, and I know the Cote was going to be a bold enough wine to hold on with these two, because you can't give these like a Pinot Noir, a really light Beaujolais or something like that. These two cheeses are too loud for. So you needed something big enough that it was going to hold on, but still work for the other two. And so, I look for universal wines and ones that I can get a lot of, because these are logistically challenging to get 30 packages out in one day. So that's the other part.
Zach, we have some great cheeses here. What's the best way to store them when people are done with them, if they don't finish them tonight, of course?
Yeah. storing them in your belly is always preferred. But if you do not finish your cheese, there's no shame in that. You want to wrap it in a parchment paper or a cheese paper. The paper we wrap our cheese is meant to be rewrapped. Will spent a really frustrating couple months importing those papers from Italy, and they're supposed to mimic like eggshells, so they're slightly perforated, so it lets ammonia out but not oxygen in, and that's the whole idea. So if you're going to wrap it in parchment paper, you can then wrap a little foil on the outside or saran wrap to keep the parchment paper down, but you don't want it to be in a completely airless environment. You don't want it to be in a Ziploc or Tupperware because your cheese will eventually ammoniate. You also don't want it on the top shelf of your fridge where the fan is. It's going to dry out your cheese the fastest. So those crisper drawers, they're not really for vegetables. It's a great dairy drawer. You could just fill all of your cheese pieces in there.
Perfect. Will would rather be crushed by a wheel of parm than buy that cheese paper again. So you can see the anguish that it took.
Oy, oy. If anybody is flying back from Italy and wants to take a pallet of paper with them next time, it would be very helpful for us. So, yeah, let us know. What other questions do we have, friends?
No questions in just yet. They will, I'm sure, trickle in momentarily. So if you want to talk about what's coming up with Mongers, I know we haven't announced our new events yet, but we will have some new coming out soon in July.
Yeah. We have a couple new events and we have a couple new product offerings. We're going to debut some boxes, like a getting ready to go grill box and a Detroit pizza box, things that you don't necessarily need a computer, and it's less interactive. You're going to cook them at home without having to worry about me on Zoom. But they're really fun. Halloumi and different really amazing sausages from some of the people we do charcuterie with. And then, of course, we're in Detroit, so Detroit pizza. And we also have some fun tastings coming up. We're going to do an Italian summer as the weather permits. It's so nice, and kind of that idea of sitting in the back and eating an antipasta tray and enjoying the sunshine. What would you do for that? We have an Alpine tasting. Ooh, there was a third one. Benji, what was it?
I think might be the family one that we're going to potentially.
Oh, yeah. It's about time. We're going to have a family event. So for all ages, a little more kid-friendly. It'll be a little less sciencey and a lot of fun. So one designed for the whole family, the whole mishpacha. Yeah.
I had a question.
Please.
Yeah.
Okay. My question was the difference between your store downtown or midtown and Ferndale. If I came into Ferndale, would I be able to find all the cheeses that you have in your other locations?
Yes. By this Saturday, I'm hoping to have all 4 of these cheeses in Ferndale. Ferndale is inside of a shared space. The Rust Belt market is kind of like a flea market, and so we definitely have less space. I like to say that it's a distillation of what we like in this store, but these are such flagship cheeses that they will be there. The biggest limitation in the Ferndale store right now that we're hoping to solve as we get used to it being reopened, it's only been open for 2 weekends now, or reopened, is it doesn't have a slicer right now. So we do only pre-packed, pre-sliced meats in that location. Okay. But in the next couple months, you'll see a slicer there and all the same charcuteries we have now.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, oh, of course. And no wine in that location.
Right.
They have a bar within the facility that sells beer there. And so we're not able to sell wine to go in Ferndale, while in Detroit we are.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect.
Yeah, no, thank you.
We have Elizabeth raising her hand. So Elizabeth, if you want to ask your question, take it away.
You might have to unmute yourself, Elizabeth.
You will have to unmute yourself if you can. I think she's doing it currently.
Awesome.
Looks like you're still on mute. It might have. There you go.
So I just wanted to know how often you're in either location. Like if I want to come in and chat with you more about any of this or anything else that you have in either location. I really prefer the Cass Avenue location, but
Yeah. So to answer that, I am in the locations less than I ever was before in this time of COVID and us trying to keep the bodies in the store to a minimum. I am often at home, which is so different for me. I've never worked from home. That's not really how you sell cheese usually, but now I'm doing that more often. And so It's easier to find me in Detroit than it is in Ferndale because Ferndale's only open a couple days a week. But it is definitely best to call if you're looking for me specifically. I'm really, really proud to say that our staff has grown so much and is really great at finding you great cheeses and telling you these stories. Also, a couple of them have been on this tasting tonight, and Dagny was the one who came up with the Parmesan and the chocolate pairing. And so they're fantastic, and they can also help you. But if there's ever something you want, we're happy to make like an appointment or let you know when I'm going to be around and talk to me directly.
Great. I was in Detroit yesterday, and I can't remember the name of the young guy who was helping me. He was awesome. He was just really, really helpful, really informative, and knew his stuff.
We talked so much when we started this company with where the apostrophe should be on the S. And I'm sure none of you ever noticed this because it's such a small detail, but it is plural possessive. I am not the only monger. It's all of our provisions. And so it's really important to us that it never becomes just the Zach Berg show. It's the Mongers Provision show, and they're really amazing group over here. And I'm so happy to hear that they did a good job. That makes me very happy.
Perfect. And then I know it's been the Zach show for a little bit, but Jules, question for you: what is coming up at Essex so people can find out and hear a little bit more from your guys' perspective?
So regarding new products, is that specifically what you mean?
Whether it's new products, new educational events, what are you guys planning on anything fun in the future that we should know about?
Yeah, new products, I like to say we don't tell anyone because we drop them like Beyonce albums. They just show up. But we do actually have a new product launching this summer. I haven't told Zach. So there's a Beyonce album! And we do. It's actually a new Gouda. It's a sheep's milk Gouda that's actually an original recipe we created. So that's the first time Essex has ever done that. We spent the last 4 years looking for a sheep's milk Gouda. We have one that we work with. It's really, really awesome, but it's tiny production. It's on an island way up North Sea, and it only makes cheese like 6 months of the year, and it's not really, yeah. And so Leah, my sister, who's an owner at Essex, has had a vision of having kind of a profile of L'Amuse cheeses. So L'Amuse Brabander, L'Amuse Signature, and then have a sheep. And we've searched for 4 years and couldn't find it. So we found the animals and we made our own recipe. So we have our very own private cheese coming out this summer, which is super thrilling. I'll tell you more about it, Zach, later. We'll have samples of that coming out in the next month.
Rachel, can you tell us roughly what size the wheels will be?
The wheels, yeah, they'll be 7-pounders. So it'll be a small, and that's because
similar size to Terschelling.
Yeah, exactly. Similar size to the Terschelling. And the reason why they're small like that is because sheep give so little milk. And so it's actually really interesting. If you ever see sheep's milk cheeses that are large, speaking of texture, I always question them on how they're going to taste. Because that means you have milk coming from more than 1 day's production. And so you kind of get some funky flavors. And so that's why historically sheep's milk cheeses are usually like at most 15 pounds. You get kind of above that, it gets kind of wonky. And they don't age out well because they're so high in fat, speaking of texture. So yeah, it'll be around a 7-pounder. It's Lacone breed, so it's a French sheep, but it's made in Friesland. So northern Netherlands, and yeah, super excited about it. Yeah, so that's new, which I never get to say. So at Essex, it's actually incredibly special that you asked that question. I actually had an answer because most of the time we have about a 4-year gap between each product. So we don't just kind of like keep them coming. A lot of the times it takes around, the longest it's taken is 7 years to bring a product to market. And we put in 7 years into the Manchego that we work with, for instance. And then it's at the market, and it's not just like, okay, bye. Like then there's usually like a year of research on the ground with customers that we send it to first, and educate them, get feedback loop that Zach was talking about. And then we branch out to other customers and then we have to educate and all that kind of stuff. So normally right now I would be heading into my busiest season of education. Tomorrow I would be in New York teaching at the Cheesemonger Invitational. For the next 2 days, I would be hosting meetings in New York for the Fancy Food Show. I'd be getting ready for an ACS session in Portland, Oregon, at the American Cheese Society Conference, and those are all canceled right now. So as of right now, you can pay attention to me at home.
She's on TikTok now.
Yeah, I'm on TikTok now. I run 2 nonprofit organizations in addition to working at Essex. They're cheese related. So one of them is we're doing a 5K fundraiser to help restaurants that have been impacted across the country. So that's why I'm on TikTok, because I'm trying to, I don't know, it seems like the right thing to do. Yeah, so at Essex right now, we don't have anything like public really. We do kind of, and we don't really do, we're a small team. We're 5 people in the entire company. So that's also the other thing I try to like remind people is it's because we've kind of been around for so long and so many people do know us, they kind of then assume that we have this like really robust big team. And I'm like, no. Like I only became a full-time employee 5 years ago. But I've been with them for 8 years. So, and I was the second full-time employee. So, we have a total of 5 people in the entire company, 3 employees, 3 owners, so I guess 6 actually. Yeah. So we are hanging out at home, doing a lot of virtual stuff and trying to support our customers. That's what we're trying to do right now, is just support our customers as much as possible, because I have a line, keep the cheese moving. So it's the cows are making milk, they're making cheese. It's getting into the caves, gotta keep moving because it's gonna get real backed up. So however I can help my customers keep the cheese moving, that means that my producers can keep the cheese moving. So
perfect, thank you.
Maybe I'll keep showing up at Mongers events. I don't know, maybe I'll just keep showing up in Detroit events. You can see me there.
You're welcome anytime, anytime.
Cool.
Friends, do we have any other questions before we call it an evening?
No, I think people are speechless after knowing the sheep cheese is coming up.
Yeah, no, and that's all I can think about now. I just want to thank everybody so much in these crazy times. It's so fun to connect with people in this way, and we're so appreciative that you chose to spend your time like this tonight. We hope that we're able to give you delicious flavors, delicious foods, a little bit of story, and a little distraction. We had a great time presenting tonight, and we're just so thankful. And make sure to check us out. We're open in physical locations again. So Midtown Detroit, on Cass between Canfield and Willis, at 9 in Woodward at the Rust Belt Market, and of course online. So check out all the different, boards and subscription packages and tastings and whatever it might be. And if there's ever anything we can do for you, please don't hesitate to ask. Most of the cool things we've come up with is because you asked us to do them and we added it to the company. So keep challenging us, keep coming by. And like I always say, if you guys keep showing up, we promise we'll keep doing what we do. So thank you so much.